Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Data Standard Audio Experience. I'm here today with Jonah Leshin, who is currently the head of data science at Datavant. And today we're going to be speaking about the importance of making data usable and its scope in healthcare. So, welcome to the show, Jonah. It's such a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah. Could you just go ahead and tell us more about your background and what led you to where you are today?
Sure. So I'm currently head of data science at Datavant, where we're helping connect the world's healthcare data and leading a team of data scientists. I was originally on the academic track. I did my PhD in theoretical math, and about a year after that, I transitioned into industry. I was looking for something that felt more collaborative, faster paced, and had more structure than my experience with academia. And so I've been working in data science startups in the Boston area since that time. As my career has gone on, I've become more interested in the business, product, and culture side of organizations as well, in addition to data science. Prior to joining Datavant, I was a co-founder at Highland Math, which was a company focused on data monetization. So that's helping companies that have data, which could be a data company or it could be a company like a supermarket that has customer data, helping them kind of package their data in a way that's valuable for users who are on some of these emerging data marketplaces like Snowflake Data Marketplace or Amazon Data Marketplace. And in that experience, I learned a lot about the business side of a company and charting the course, the vision for a product. And I've really enjoyed kind of thinking about those things since that time. Highland Math was acquired by Datavant almost exactly a year ago. And I've been at Datavant since then. I'm located in the Boston area, which is also where I grew up. So, yeah.
Yeah, so it's clear that you have a lot of great experience to pull from, and you're very passionate about the data field, especially. Specifically in data engineering, it's often an area that's overlooked, but plays a really large role in analytics and just consuming a lot of the side of data science in general. And so, why do you believe this part of the process is so important?
Yeah, so I certainly agree that it's often overlooked. And maybe we can start by just talking about what we mean by data engineering. I think about it as the processes necessary to build a data pipeline to support model development and model deployment. And so if you think about what that means, that could be pulling data from a source to begin with, perhaps a third-party source. Maybe you're using API, then you want to clean the data, store it, pass it to a model, evaluate the model, do some logging. And for each of these, in order to have a successful end-to-end process, we have to have them be maintainable, run in a reasonable amount of time, alert when they're not working, not be crazy financially expensive, depending on the resources of your company. And so that what people often think about the data science component or the algorithm development, data training and tuning certain parameters, that really, in my mind, sits on top of the data engineering. This applies more to live products where you have data coming in, being processed, data going out live. In certain areas of data science, if it's more research oriented, like say you're doing a psychology experiment and you're analyzing the data and the result is going to be publication and you're working with static data sets, then a lot of these data engineering tooling might not be necessary. So it's important to balance the infrastructure with the scope of the problem. The other thing I might say is that I wouldn't draw a hard line between data science versus data engineering. There's definitely gray area. They definitely overlap, and it's important to be cognizant of that interplay.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. Data scientists and data engineers work very closely together. So, really important to just be able to communicate that well within the team with all the projects that you're working on. And specifically, when it relates to healthcare, data is both construed and very sensitive when you work with it. There's a lot of high regulations working in this specific industry. And so, how is working with patient and healthcare data different from what you've seen in comparison to other fields? And what has been the most challenging part for you to do so?
Yeah, so to begin, healthcare data encompasses a lot of different sources of data. So think about when you visit your primary care doctor or you see a specialist, there's going to be a data generated from an incident like that. There are insurance claims data, lab tests, genetic tests, pharmacy prescription data. So there are a variety of data sources, and it's fairly obvious that it's very important to preserve the privacy of this data. And so practically speaking, the sharing of healthcare data is regulated by HIPAA. And so the requirements for sharing healthcare data are clearly laid out. And in some sense, it's quite nice. If you contrast this with, for example, location data, where I think most people would agree that governance is less clear, but you can still deduce who a person is based on the patterns of locations that they visited, even if their, like name and other personal information about them has been completely de-identified. Similarly, HIPAA is a set of laws that guard against this kind of re-identification risk. So being able to know who the individual is who's associated with a certain set of healthcare data. And this is done by regulating what combinations of data one can share about an individual. For example, there are certain rare disease codes that you might not be able to include in a data set because just even knowing that a person has a certain rare disease code, that limits the scope of who that person could possibly be. And so there are these rules in place that govern the combinations of data that one is able to share. And in practice, this translates into a few considerations. So one is making sure that the data is properly de-identified. And there's this situation that can come up where even if two individual data sets are individually de-identified according to HIPAA, when you join them together, it's possible they will not be, because when you piece the data together from each of them, it results in enough information that could be identifying, even if those pieces of information alone about an individual were not identifying. And so if data is typically de-identified before it is shared, and so if you have de-identified and the original identified data, those need to be kept in separate environments to make sure that there's no risk of commingling them. And again, this re-identification risk that we're trying to avoid. And then the last consideration I'll mention is that if you do come across data that is not properly de-identified, there are certain kind of parties to alert and certain procedures one has to follow. And then one question becomes when working with healthcare data. So we talked about how things have to be de-identified. So you may be, say, conducting a study where you need to tie a mortality data source together with some COVID test data because, say, you're studying COVID survival rates. And the question becomes, how do you do that, given that the data has to be de-identified? So one thing Datavant is solving for this problem by enabling a company to incorporate and link different data sets in a de-identified way to be able to do the analysis that they need to do at a patient level. Another challenging aspect is then identifying when two patient records might refer to the same individual, especially when those records are de-identified. So you can think that in a data set, the same individual might appear multiple times, but due to changes in last name, due to people changing location or a data entry issue, the records may not be identical. And so another thing that Datavant is working to do is to be able to assign a consistent patient level identifier. And this general problem is called privacy preserving record linkage, sometimes abbreviated PPRL. So being able to link records from disparate data sets in a way that preserves the privacy. And this is crucial for being able to do analysis at the patient level, to be able to stitch patient data together from different sources. And so those are some of the challenges and also exciting problems that come up when working with healthcare data.
Yeah, definitely. That's really interesting having to just hearing it from your perspective of identifying data, because I don't believe a lot of other industries have to do that just to, keep privacy of patients like this. But that's super interesting to hear. And when you're communicating between companies and different clients, there's a large amount of data that is sent, and some of which is really hard to process for others when it's encrypted information. And so what are workarounds for this and common practices within the industry?
Yeah, so on the encrypted component of it, Datavant's technology is built to work with encrypted information in that it allows a company in our ecosystem to convert encrypted data that they receive into their own encryption scheme. And so by converting data from different sources that they receive into that are originally in different encryption schemes into their own, it makes that data linkable. For big data, dealing with data volume, there are some common workarounds that could apply to any industry, like limiting the size of an individual file or delivering data directly to the location a recipient is going to use it, like delivering to a database versus a cloud file storage. And then the one thing I would say on this is that I encourage any data company to invest in proper tooling around reading and transferring large files. We have certainly had our fair share of experiences, assisting clients when working with data sets that might be too large to process properly. So these sort of kind of operational tasks that are necessary to even do anything is to simply be able to get access to the right data. And from there, then you can incorporate them into your pipeline, build models, and do things. But these problems of working with encrypted data and working with large data sets, that is, in some sense, the starting point for the data flows that come afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of different moving parts to a lot of the data that you work on and the different projects that you're working on. And you as the head of data science, you are a leader within the industry, within your company. And there's a lot of different moving parts to leading a successful team. So are there any specific practices or roles and responsibilities that you think are often overlooked at all?
Yeah, so I would say a couple of things. One is simply documentation. So even if something seems perfectly clear, it's always better to document it. Anything that might be used again should be documented, and at least one other person should ideally know how it works for teams or say companies that have more than 10 people. And documentation is really rewarded up front. I think it's important to establish as part of company culture. It's typically, 3 months afterwards, or 3 years after something was originally built, when someone might wish that there was some documentation, only to find that it was not documented properly. So that's something that I think often goes overlooked. Another thing is getting proper business and product context before beginning an analysis or product development. And the reason why I think this is so important is because it allows one as a data scientist to be a decision maker. And this can eliminate some of the back and forths that one might otherwise have with the product team or with the sales team. As an example, so suppose that you are asked as a data scientist to estimate the impact on sales of a certain product change. If that's the only information you're given, then you have some questions and kind of need to make some inferences around what is the scope of this, kind of what is in terms of how deep this analysis needs to be, what is the timeline, how should I communicate it, whom should I communicate it to? And so if you have answers like kind of, is this a change that's definitely going to be made, or is there time to debate it? And who did the request come from? Is this, the CEO who is kind of curious about this as a longer term change, or is this something the product team needs to do next month? These are important pieces of context to ultimately properly operationalize, execute this request. And this also ties in with having good documentation and communication across an entire company. So having that context and to become a decision maker and a real owner of the work, I think is extremely important. So those are a couple of things that come to mind.
No, I think it's great that you mentioned it. I think documentation is super important within an organization. Even if it's a very large organization, it gets very messy and there's a lot of data silos often that can occur. So great to hear that.
And the kind of the more those build up, in some sense, the harder it is to discontinue a practice like this, where there are these kind of data silos and shared knowledge, because it just becomes the scope of the problem becomes larger and larger, and it becomes less and less appealing to tackle. So kind of having a culture of good documentation that permeates the organization, I think, is extremely important.
Yeah, absolutely. And a great point that you brought up. And Jonah, I wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today on the Data Standard podcast. It was so great to have you and just learn more about some of the work that you're doing. And at the Data Standard, we're trying to build a community where everyone can just network and collaborate with each other. So is there anything the community can help you do?
So thanks for having me. It was great to be on. One thing I would say is that, for folks who are interested in data science or software engineering opportunities, Datavant is actively hiring. You can feel free to apply on our website, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. And also, if anyone's interested in discussing privacy preserving record linkage, that's always something that I enjoy discussing, as it's a problem that Datavant is actively working on.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And where can everyone connect with you online?
Yeah, so I'd say the best places to reach out to me are on LinkedIn. It's my name, which is relatively uncommon. And I'm also on Medium, again, at Jonah Leshin.
Okay, perfect. And to our audience, for more information on the Data Standard, you can find us at www.datastandard.io, as well as on our LinkedIn and YouTube channel. And once again, thank you so much, Jonah, for joining us again. It was so great speaking with you, and I hope to speak to you again soon on the podcast.
Thank you. Likewise. Thanks again.